Really? What okay, down across the way.
You don't have to introduce yourself. You don't have to introduce yourself. You want to be.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah.
Welcome, everybody. This is a slight tale of a tale, I really will, of what could happen in the 70s if you get too interested in what you're reporting on it with a magazine. So this is Susie's experience based on that.
Well, thank you for coming and welcome everybody. Before I start, I want to thank some people who were really helpful to me. Donna Bradish, Catherine Brown, Vic, Jack Page, on the technical aspects of this, because it was totally new to me. And, okay. Okay. I have to give this warning to you. Do I just go down arrow?
Yes, down arrow.
It's not doing. Do I need to put that on? Oh, okay. I see that we have some people here who are under 14, but they get a special dispensation from me because I know that they'll like this. We're going to have a few animals in here, and there may be some, well, there's not going to be really, really bad language, but just wanted to prepare you. So, the background of this is that I was in London, and I was a freelance journalist, and I was working for some publications that were reporting on what used to be called the third world, but now it's called the low and middle income world. So in the process of doing that, I realized how creative and self-sufficient that some of these people in these countries were. So I went out on weekends and I talked to people in England and Wales who were trying to live self-sufficiently. And I found that they were on the right trail. They were, repairing, reusing, recycling. But this was in the 70s. This is 1975. So this was kind of before individual groups could afford to get solar. So that was just an idea in their heads. They wanted to go there, but it wasn't quite there. So a friend of mine told me about a community in the French Alps. And they said, you should go there because they are practically off the grid. And so I said, well, are they totally off the grid? No, they are almost off the grid. So I went there and, oops. Too much. Okay, this is a map of the area that I went to. It's in the Parc des Écrins, and that means écrin is the word for jewels in French. So you can't see the outline on this map, but it shows you the topography. And so I came in from London and Paris and Lyon, and then I went down to L'Argentière. That's right there. And then there's a road that goes down here, swoops back up. We call this the ramp. And this is Fresenier, which is it's like an administrative government title called a commune. So go on down the road. This is Les Violin, the closest. I don't mean to shake like this. It was Les Violin, which is the last village before you go into this area. And here's the little village, Dormeuse, that I visited. And you can barely see it, but there are a few little buildings right in here. And right at the beginning of the trailhead, there is a fantastic waterfall. But I'm so sorry, I didn't have a camera with me, so I never thought to take pictures there. And it's really lovely, but you go on up the trail, and in about 45 minutes, you reach these little buildings. And what's interesting is that this is a protected area. Right up here is a line of peaks called the Crête de Dormeuse. Well, a crête is a line of peaks. And here's the Tête de Dormeuse, which is even higher than the crête. And it's a lovely area. And you can see that this is north, and they're down at a south exposure. So they're pretty protected, although they have some really good snow in the winter. And I'll show you that in a minute. Let's see if there's anything else I need to say about that. Oh, one thing is, this L'Argentière-la-Bessée is on the Durance River. And there's a river, a torrent that goes through Dormeuse. It's called the Torrent de Chichin, and I don't know what that means. But it's a very, very swift-moving torrent that gradually empties into the Durance. And it goes through the village. Okay. Okay, this is an example of how beautiful the scenery is. This is called Meditation Mountain, as you see. We have 4 horsepower there. And I say we because I've already decided to live there. We have 4 horsepower. One horse is a stallion. The race is called the Merens, M-E-R-E-N-S. And they come from the Pyrenees, and they're very, very strong. And this is a visitor. I don't even know who that was, but the mountain, as you can see, is well trod because and sheep and all other animals are going up there. And up at the top here is a flat surface where we used to go and have festivities. We'd have parties. We'd have birthday parties up there. We'd have the village festival in August. And it's just lovely. So the other half of this horsepower is, it's a mare called Sultan, and they're both hardy as they can be. And then we had a Deux Chevaux parked at the trailhead, I'm sorry, and it was so battered and beaten, it was really bad, but it would actually work because somebody would go in and repair it occasionally. But it was just it was the automobile that we could take down to the valley to go shopping if we needed to, and if the snow didn't block us. Okay, to tell you how the village is set, this is the first section of the village, and this is where I lived. When I got to London, I decided that I really wanted to come back, and I lived here at Chez Paul. And he had his chalet. He had some rental properties in a little group there. He had a refuge for skiers and hikers, and these are some skiers that are setting out to go on a hike on ski. And this is the middle tier of the village, and this church and school date back to probably the 1400s, because I won't go into a whole lot of history. I have a sheet there on this table that talks about the history. there were various successions of people coming up there, and they were refugees because they were being persecuted by the Catholic Church. And I believe that these two buildings were probably inspired by the Vaudois, and they come from a canton in Switzerland. And they also had been persecuted, so they were all kind of going up into these alpine mountains where no one could find them. And okay. Okay, I have to explain to you what do we mean by being off the grid. Off the grid means that there's no electricity here, nothing, except a telephone line. And the telephone line was handy because the tracks of that line led us down to a cliff, which we could go down in the winter and get down to a road, get down to parking with, because otherwise we'd be going across an avalanche field and trying on skis to go down, so it was pretty dangerous. Okay. The reason I was interested in Paul, who I came back to live with, is I saw him on the hay terraces above the torrent, and they were marked off with rock walls. And I saw him on a hike one day, and he was knocking at these rocks with a staff. And so I went over and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm hunting snails." I said, "Well, that's cool, that's nice." And he showed me a bucket, he had a pail full of snails, about 20 of them, trying to get out of that. And so he said, "Do you want to help?" And I said, "Sure." So he picked up a stick and he kind of whittled away at it, which gave me something to knock the rocks with. And we went along the wall and knocked at rocks, and I found a couple and he found a couple more, and we put them in the bucket. And he said, "Would you like to come to lunch at my chalet?" And I said, "Well, when?" And he said, "Well, in 2 days, because they have to purge. And I won't go into the purging with you. It's really gory, okay?" But the snails were delicious. Anyway, okay. So this is, I've lost my place. I'm way beyond here. Oh, okay. As you can see, the names of the cows were pretty obvious, Moo Moo and Bouchard. Moo Moo is the French spelling for Moo Moo, of course. But these cows were very important because we planned to be at Dormeuse in the winter. So one of the ideals of living in a place like this is that you have to be very, very organized and well prepared to be there in the winter without without having to go to a store. And so I spent from mid-August to I was back in October. I spent about a month until about mid-November intensely learning how they live here. So one of the things I had to do was learn how to milk. Well, I have it on the sheet here. I became a milkmaid. And that was more difficult than I thought it would be. Moo was already started. We got out one morning. Moo had already started with Paul milking her. And then he pulled the stool out and he said, "Okay, it's your turn." So I tried to milk Moo, and a few drops came out, and I said, "I don't know if I can do this." And he said, "Just keep at it." So while I'm doing that, he's over milking Bouchard. We have a barn nearby the chalet where the cows have a beer and a place to sleep at night. It's closed in. And I'll get to the architecture of these houses in a little bit. You'll have to remind me. Anyway, I got about a pint of milk. And Paul was milking Bouchard, and he got about a gallon. So, but I learned how we got we took this stuff into the chalet, and he always had a hot, he had an old kitchen, wood stove. So it had an oven and it had 2 heating units on top. So there was always a big pot on top of that stove. So we poured the milk in, we made curds, we drained them, we put them in molds, and sooner or later we had really nice cheese. And that we also had nice butter, and we had a lot of really nice cream and whipped cream. So when you go out and you forage for blueberries, and you put that really good fresh whipped cream on them, yum yum, yum yum. Anyway, so the cows were, oh, I forgot the nasty part of the cows. We had to clean up after them. So there was a sluice at the foot of the barn area where we had to scrape down all the feces and the urine, and that went into wheelbarrows. So those were filled in. We went over to these 3 big piles, and he had 3 different piles, and they were successional by years. And the oldest one was used on the garden that year. It was sitting there curing enough. And the new piles, we just dumped stuff on them. And then one of them, I think it was the second pile, had this fantastic crop of squash on it. It was planted directly in that. So pretty good fertilizer, pretty good fertilizer. Okay. So a lot of the things that I learned then was also, learning how to harvest the garden. And that was interesting because they could use the garden all year long after it was planted and it started growing. But at the end, when we had to get everything out of there, we had a little place in the house on the ground. It was a cave, and we could put all of the hard vegetables, the carrots, the potatoes, the radishes, whatever we thought would last a long time were in that little cave. And it was just bare dirt, but we had divisions with wood to separate things. And we had gone down into the Durant's Valley to pick apples and pears and quince. So we had those harder fruits to put down there too. So we had pretty good cash in that. And so I won't go into the root cellar again until later, but one of the things that happened one morning, I was trying to have a second cup of coffee, and he said, come on, we gotta go. And I said, what are we gonna do? We're gonna make sauerkraut. So he brings out these big, big crocks, this tall. He sets them by the fountain. I didn't show you that. This is the fountain, but you can't see it very well. It was lovely because this is a stone pile where the pipe comes through and pours water continually. And at the foot of that is this trough that's built with one single piece of wood, and it was just beautiful. So up here are the milk buckets, and every now and then somebody would leave soap up here, and cows will eat anything. So we would look out sometimes, and the cows would have eaten the soap and they were blowing bubbles. So it was just nuts. They were very entertaining. We did have some entertainment there, and that was one of them. Anyway, so sauerkraut, back to sauerkraut. Sorry I'm jumping around so much. So the crocks were there, and he brought out this contraption that was about as high as this table, and it had on 4 legs, and it had this contraption standing up that looked like a little guillotine. And so then he brings out a wheelbarrow full of cabbage. And I said, oh, that's interesting. What is this? He says, this is a machine for cutting wheat, but we're going to use it to cut the cabbages. So I said, okay. So we spent several hours cutting cabbages and stacking and stacking pieces in the crocks. And we had onions, we had garlic, we had spices, we had herbs. We would just stack different layers of things in the crocks to make the sauerkraut. And believe me, it's very handy in the winter when you can't go shopping. And it's, you know, it was very different between the different crocks. Another thing is, see if I can get to that one. Oh, we also had chickens. And chickens are so, really, I think they're necessary for recycling or really living without having to go shop. You know, you have eggs, so you have protein. And you can give after your meal, you can give them your table scraps so they get something to eat. And then you bake their shells and crush them up, and you give that back to the chickens, and that helps them keep their calcium levels up. So they're all a part of the cycle of self-sufficiency. And okay, another thing that we had to do was we had to have enough hay for the cows. Now, scything, it's called scything. It's beautiful to watch it when it's done correctly, because they're swooping the scythe, which is very sharp, in a kind of a curve. And if you see a couple of people together, they're just going, you know, they're doing this continually as they advance upward. And show you something here. Okay, the tools have to be extremely sharp. So I put them on this little metal stand, and they have a ball peen hammer, and they pound the edge of it to where it's very hair thin, and it's almost as sharp as a razor. And it doesn't take very long to do that. He's doing that before he even goes to the hay fields. And then they carry a stone with them to the hay fields with a little water too, so that they can do this during haying. And this is a hay rake. It's an old hay rake that's missing some of its tines, so he's repairing those. I don't know what kind of wood that is, but every tool that they used here was probably left by the bourgeois, and they had very special woods for most of their tools. So this is somebody hauling the hay to the barn. And I don't know how much weight that is, but if the horses were being used for something else, they were used for transport all the time. They were hauling stuff up for us that we had shopped for to stock up, and they were also working for visitors sometimes. But when they weren't available, people had to haul hay. And these are special cords that were tied with I don't have a picture of it here, but it's a way to cross the cords, just, you know, both sides, and hold it together. Oops, I think I skipped something. Okay, this is me, and we have been loading up on wood, and I didn't expect for it to be quite so heavy. So, you know, I'm leaning on this, I'm sorry. Anyway, we got wood from the forest, which was above our hay fields, and it was larch wood. It was very lovely trees, and they lose their needles in winter. They turn yellow and gold and really pretty colors before they drop the needles. But they're very good wood for burning and furniture making and whatever. But these, I don't know how much these logs weigh, but it was a challenge for me. We had the horses that day, so when they were up at the forest, they would roll these logs down to us. I was at the bottom, you know, making sure that whoever was walking on the trail would be out of the way. So I was in the way. So I was scampering a lot, and so then we get the horses over there and we get them loaded and bring them here. This is our fence here. And we just dump stuff here, and Paul would come and take it over to a chopping block and cut it further. So here we are. This is another part of the autumn. This whole series has been the autumn and stocking up. So we're up at a higher altitude. I'm not sure if this is me or not. It may be. I can't tell. The costume doesn't look like mine. But this is a friend from Briançon, and we had. I don't know if you've ever picked blueberries, but you use a little bucket with tines, and you push it through the plant and then pull up on it, and the berries fall into the bucket. And so that was great to have that tool, and that was something ancient that had been around forever. Okay, so we foraged other things, and so here's some examples. I don't know if you can see that. I have some sheets of, oh no, wait a minute, do I have that? I'll have to make some copies if anybody wants it. One of the things that I was shocked about was nettle. Nettles are good to eat. You know, I used to see them all the time as a kid. And you know, they sting you and you avoid them, but if you get a pair of gloves, you can pick them. You bring them in and you put them in boiling water and they make a dandy vegetable, you know, for your evening meal. So that was a real surprise to me. And rhubarb, wild rhubarb, was a really nice sweet. We could make cakes or pies, preserves. So all of this stuff we were doing was to get, this took place in a month, was to get ready for a winter where you can't go anywhere. You're going to be blocked by snow, maybe. The rest of these things are things, we picked a lot of hyssop, thyme, sage. I can't remember if we did much chamomile, but here we have the snails. We had blueberries, raspberries. Some other people picked arnica, if you're familiar with arnica. It's a really good salve for topical skin problems. And mushrooms, of course, we had, right next to our chalet, we had little bitty button mushrooms, really delicious. And we had a small beige yellow thing called bolete. And we had puffballs. I don't know if you've ever seen them in a forest, but if you kick one, the spores go everywhere, or thousands. And, but they're edible. Okay. Oops. Okay. Now, we still have to do something before the winter. Before the winter goes, we have to take the horses down to another pasture where they can overwinter. And we took them through a lot of mountain country down to the Alps of Haute-Provence. And this is Cossack, he's all loaded up with our gear, and he's picking rose hips. Now, we ate rose hips too because of the vitamin C in them, but I couldn't understand how a horse with a big nose like that could get a rose hip. And I mean, they're amazing. They pull back their big lips, and they put out their big teeth, and they go snap, and they get that rose hip. And I was amazed. Anyway, it was fun to watch them. So that was a little bit of snack for them on the trip. This is Paul looking at a map. He's riding Sultan right now because in the process of moving, we got rid of some of our gear. This is a chouari, it's from Morocco. It carried all of our cooking stuff. And these are just, you know, stuffed ground cloths. We had one night, our first night out was tough because we were in a small tent. We each had down comforters, down sleeping sacks. And in the morning we woke up and our eyebrows were frozen. And the top of the tent was frozen. So we knew we had to get out of there quick and get something warm. We made tea. The horses were fine. So we got on the road really as quickly as we could, but that was about as cold as we got on that trip. And this was in November, so we were still in mountain country, lower than the high Alps, so. Okay, here's a kid getting a ride on one of the horses, and of course, he's delighted. Every time we went through a town, the kids, it was like the circus come to town. It's like everybody crowded around, and people, if we were in the square, we were watering the horses, because town squares there always have a trough or a fountain in the square. And so there's this crowd around, and everybody's talking, and there's one little girl says, "Vous êtes Americain, n'est-ce pas?" Which means, "You're an American, right?" And then I answered in French, really bad French. I said, "Yes, how can you tell?" And everyone laughed, because American French is really bad sometimes. I'm not trying to say that some of you in here cannot speak good French, but I didn't. Anyway, so this kid's a happy kid. So on the way, we were on roads, and they were hard on the horses' hooves, and we were on the verges of roads. And so we found a farmer who also had Moran's horses. And so he had farrier tools, so we could trim Paul could get down and actually trim both of the horses' their hooves. And so we went merrily on our way to, that was too quick. We got down to the Seventh-day Adventist community where the horses winter. And wow, that was an interesting thing. I was dead tired, we both were. Paul left because he had to get us a ride back to Dormeuil. I was there in a little apartment, and I wanted to sleep, and some lady comes in and says, "Oh, well, it's almost prayer time, so let's go into the main building." And I said, "Well, do you think I could go tomorrow?" And she said, "Oh, no, we always go to prayer." And I said, "Okay." So, I knew that I was going to have to earn my keep there, so I went to prayer meeting, and I helped them for a day or so in their gardens, which were beautiful and so well organized. And they had a really good pastry chef from Holland there, and he could make delicious stuff out of tofu, which surprised me, because tofu to me is just kind of neutral. I know it can be spiced up and used with a lot of different things, but he could make pies and cakes, and I thought, well, if I'm going to live someplace else, this might be the place for me. So, onward and upward. Okay, now it's wintertime, as you can see. This is the refuge. Paul has a refuge. It was connected to a big community building that was part barn, part tack room, part refuge, dormitory type things. And then there's a big community hall in there that we call the Jimi Hendrix. Now, I did not name that, but the kids who lived there, the younger communards, named it. And he got that unsnowed. I don't know how he did it, but I think that this snow happened in around 77 or 78. It was pretty good snow. These are the large trees opposite the village. Okay. Now, in the winter, everybody they don't have to, but if you want to stay in the winter and you want to make money so that you can buy plants in the spring or buy any other supplies, you need to have a craft. So I was sent down to Fresnier, where there's a weaver, and she taught me how to weave. I was terrible at it, and I had really bad wool to use, but I'll go through that later. Paul was a carver, and he used a wood that's called stone pine, and when he finished this, he sent this to me. It's really lovely. It's a mirror. And so he could make tables, he could make trays, and his work, I don't remember how much he got for his work, but we could buy plants with it, maybe have a picnic. So I haven't talked about Eliab yet. Eliab was an artist who lived in the old school, and he was a sweet, dear person, but very much a bachelor. So we had to, every time we took cheese up there to put it in the pie safe that he had, I had to clear that out because there would be flies in there, or, you know, there would be some really awful goo hanging off the cheese molds. So, but anyway, I think this is lovely. This is the tree of life. He had been, he'd worked at a china and pottery company in Switzerland. He was Swiss. And so that was his main topic. He also was in love with the opera, Boris Godunov. And so one night, he invited us up to have a showing of the opera, Boris Godunov, with his paintings of the people in that opera. He used a candle to to light the slides that he was using. Of course, we were very, very close to the sheet he hung to show those slides. But I think at one point he had to use torch, I'm not sure. He had to use some other kind of light to get us to see that. He was talented. And he called every woman in the place, he called the cacahuete, which means peanut. Okay, this is me trying to weave. I had started on a table runner. It's a big loom that Paul had created, so he was hoping that somebody would come up and use it. So I was carrying wood over there one day so I could have a fire in that place. It was a different room. And he said, we can't use any more wood. And I said, what? I've already been through this weaving lesson, the weaving lessons. And he said, well, we just don't have enough. So I thought, that was a sore point. So I did manage to get some weaving done when it got warmer in the spring. But this was too difficult in the winter. Okay. So the people who were staying in the refuge were, they invited us to go with them on a ski trip to the Grand Pignet, which was a big mountain to our southwest, and with a couple of lakes nearby so that you could do a circle around this area. Well, you can see they're walking uphill on their skis, and they're going down here, but then they're going to have to walk up again this way. Well, Donna Bradish loaned me one of her skis, and the way they do that, this is her ski and the boot. Oops. Okay, this is a Nordic ski. They're long and skinny. And Donna used this for cross country, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, in the Alps, I'm not really sure exactly what kind of skis they use, but I've got newspaper on here to show what they use to go uphill on skis. They used nylon covers on the bottom of the skis, and the grain was going from here to the back. So when you're going up, you don't slide back. The grain of the nylon stops you. And this would have a loop here to hold the skin on. So I just put newspaper on here to show you that there's a covering there that you can use if it has a grain. And that was something I had never done. The people who live in the Alps have a fantastic system of ski touring, because you can go for a day of ski touring, and you go up and down mountains on this kind of ski. And then at the end, you have this nice little refuge where they give you soup and some nice meal afterwards, and it's really wonderful. You might even find it's a village and they have a restaurant where you might get some snails. Anyway, I found it fascinating, and we were very fit because we walked around so much, and we were lifting things, and we were milking, and anyway, So we were great going up the hills. When we came back down, we were kind of falling every now and then. And they said, well, we thought you knew how to ski. And we said, we do, but we're not good at going down. we haven't skied. Neither one of us had skied that much, but we were strong. All right. Okay, we're into spring now, spring and summer, and it's unbelievable. This is one of the shepherds. These are native villagers. They come up, it's called transhumance. It's changing places. And they bring the sheep up for the pastures in the spring and summer and autumn, and then they take them home down to a valley in the winter. And I don't know how many sheep are in that group, but there were there were 2 or 3 other shepherds who would bring their sheep up, and it reminds me that we had a couple of wars with the shepherds. One time Paul was over on the hayfield, and one of the shepherds was over there. He was scything on our hayfield, which is the only hay fields we had. And so I was over across in the village, and the torrent was just, blaring. It's so loud, it's so fast. And they couldn't hear me, but I was saying, "Arrête! Vieux crétin!" I said that twice, and then I thought, oh, that's not nice. You know what a crétin is? It's a cretin. And so that was not a very good thing to say, but he didn't hear me because the torrent was so loud. But that was the last time I ever did anything like that with any of the shepherds, because if they heard me, they would come over and kill me. But anyway, we did have one war one time. In the summer, we had, I think it was this shepherd. I don't even know who that is there. I was on the hayfields trying to move some sheep off of the hayfields. They weren't supposed to be there grazing. They could graze all over the mountain. They had pastures all over the place. So I went over there, and we had a couple of visitors there. We were in our front yard at a table having something to drink. So I said, well, come on, let's go chase those sheep. So we were trying to chase the sheep off the hayfield, but there was a shepherd dog there, and he was pushing against us. We kept on pushing, and he pushed, and pretty soon there was a shout from way at the top of the village, and it was the shepherd, and he was shouting, "Stop, stop," and so we kept on pushing, and the dog kept on pushing. So in a minute, I heard this sound over about 10 feet from me, zip, and then ding, it was a bullet. And you hear a sound, you hear that zip thing, and then you hear a little bit of a metallic noise, and I knew what that was. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want anyone shooting at me. And so we stopped, of course. We stopped trying to push sheep. He came running down from the top of the mountain, from the top of the village, right up to us. And he said, you can't do that to our dogs and our sheep. And I said, yes, we can. You're on our hayfields. And you have the whole pasture system. You have it all over the village. You have it around the village, higher than the village. You have a lot of pasturage. And he said, you don't have the right to tell us what to do, or something like that. Of course, my French was so bad still. I didn't hear most of what he said. I was scared. And so he said, well, we'll see about this. And I said, yeah, we will. So he left with his dog and the sheep, and we went back to the cabin where I shed a few tears because it was scary. And we didn't have those problems very often, because every now and then we'd have this, we would have a good rapport with them, because maybe we wanted to borrow a tool from them, or they wanted to borrow a tool from us. So that worked. And it could be tricky. And one time when they were going down, they were taking the sheep down for the winter, Paul was standing at the door when they were all just rushing past, and he said, I'm so glad they're going. It was just a lot more peaceful without the shepherds there. But we did help them. They had a protest. I'm crossing this off my list of things that I became, a protester. we helped them. There was an aluminum factory in L'Argentière. It was a mining town. Argent is silver. That had closed, but they had an aluminum plant. And the emissions from that were they were falling on some pastures, and if the sheep was eating that grass, they were getting ill and they would lose their teeth. So it was a terrible situation because then they couldn't eat. They had no teeth. So we didn't know the outcome of that. We went there to protest with them. I think there were about 4 of us that went down from the village. But we didn't know the outcome. I think I read recently that the company called Péchinet had closed in about mid-1980s, so they didn't last too long. But they were still emitting, I'm sure. Okay, let me get down to this. Okay, so in the springtime is when you go down and spend the money that you've made in the winter, if you have any. You know, I can't be coy about this. Everybody there who was from the United States or a country in Europe, or they had worked in their previous lives, we had money. I could have called my parents anytime and they would have sent me money to fly me back home. Paul was the same way. We came from middle class homes. We were educated. We had jobs. We had some money in savings. But it was kind of like you wanted to do this because it was important. We were environmentalists. We had become environmentalists. And so this is going down to the market at Gap, Gap is the town, which is the prefecture. And that's where I finally became, this is my green card. And that prefect signed it. And this means that I am a coal exploitant agricole. Like, I think it means I'm an assistant farmer. And so, that's why I call myself a peasant. Anyway, the fair was fascinating because these are the same cows that we had. I didn't tell you about them. They're Taurine, Tarine. And they're very, very hardy, and they're wonderful in mountains because they're capable of getting up cliffs, and not cliffs, they're capable of managing heights and leaping over brooks and that kind of thing. So, and there's a little calf that they have, and I think it's wonderful. I don't know if you all ever, did anyone here ever see Far From the Madding Crowd? It was a movie from the book. They had a scene in there that was very much like this, because except for the costumes, but there are all these traders around, talking about the cows and what they cost, and associated with this was a great outdoor market where we got our plants, bedding plants, all kinds of other stuff. They had maybe 20 different varieties of olives on display, because this is Haute Provence. It's right above the Provençal area where they grow olives all over the place, probably. And and then they had wonderful olive oil there for sale. So we stock up on all that. And they had all kinds of animals there. They had ducks and cats and dogs and chickens and guineas and some of these smaller animals were all, in wire cages or kind of fiber cages. And it was just a wonderful atmosphere. So we get our shopping done there. We don't buy any animals because we don't need any more animals. We buy some cheese and some good bread, and we go into a little pasture and have a picnic. This is Paul here. This is a man, one of the younger communards. And this is Charlie, who was my host when I first came there. He was from London. And I can't remember the names of some of the other people. That's not important now. But it was wonderful to be there instead of in the snow. Yeah. And Okay, don't ask me why Paul's wearing a Speedo. Okay, this is getting the ground ready for planting, and the horses, of course, are they're helping get that ready, and I think we've already spread the fertilizer, and this is Charlie leading the horse, and I think it's Cossack plowing, and there's Sultan. She's just running along with us and teasing him probably. And Paul is here with the plow handles. And a lot of times if there's newer tack where you have the reins coming along the sides of the horse with a little kind of a connection at the back of the horse, and then the guy running the plow can have control of the reins. It was amazing for me because I helped one time lead the horse. So here are some of the plants we had in the garden. I'm not going to list them. I have a sheet over there. You can take a copy of that if you're interested. And I say later years, I had a kitchen garden, and I did it so that we could have salad greens and tomatoes, which I grew under plastic. And there was Paul had a beehive on the balcony. And while I was doing the kitchen garden, I got stung. So I said, you've got to remove the beehive, okay? I mean, he loved keeping his beehives, but it had to go with the other beehive, so he moved it. But anyway, so I have copies of that if you'd like a copy of it. Okay, so in the spring, we have new baby animals, and this is Moo with her new calf, and I don't know why I'm so dressed up. I don't usually look like that at W's. I look like I've got too many smears of dirt on me, but we must have been having some kind of a fete. We had a party going, or in August they had, this calf would have been older than that, but we were probably having some kind of a little get-together. And I think that's a sweet picture. That calf is still wet. And when they're born, you just rub them with hay to dry them off a little bit. And I had seen a calf born where they had to remove the calf with a rope. And it was hard to see that, but they got the calf out and the cow was okay afterwards, but it's not a pretty sight. And here we are with a new foal from Sultan, and one of the younger communards, Gail, and I think that's a sweet picture. And look how lush the grass is already. And this is all our animals were free range. And what was difficult sometimes is before we milked, if they were out in a pasture a mile or two away, we had to go get them. The cows would show up because they wanted to be milked. Usually they would show up. The horses were different. We had to take carrots, not on a stick. We hid them around behind our back, and we approached them very carefully, and finally got close enough to put a bridle on them. But it was something else to try to go get those animals up that were free range. Okay, this is skinny dipping. We have the torrent going through the village. And this is really not a good picture. This isn't even the beach we used. It's further up the torrent, but you can see how swift it is. It's snow melt. So this is a guy sitting on the edge of a rock. He's nude. This is a woman, and I don't know what she's doing. She looks like she's about to dive in, but it's too, she may have just been, she's probably just exploring. But further down this way was our beach, and it was just a little strip of grass. It was very close to our house. So we could just take a towel and a bar of soap, go down about 8 feet down to the beach, and get cold as heck. Get immersed, and people would go down there with all their clothes on. and just to wash everything. They would wash their clothes and wash their body at the same time and then run out and get in the sun. But it was very good to have that. That brings up the subject of hygiene. When you don't have a bathroom, we had outhouses, and our outhouse was so great because it had such a great view. And it had views of mountains opposite, and you know, that reminds me of some of our entertainment in the winter. I'm getting off topic right here, but we had to bathe in buckets. If it wasn't summer and if it wasn't warm weather and we couldn't go to the torrent, if it was winter, we had to take a bucket of water. But we had hot water on the stove all the time, and we would take that into the chalet with a towel underneath and just sponge off right inside the chalet, and that was our winter bath. And wasn't every Saturday night, but you know, we tried to do it as often as we could. And our water supply came from the torrent, but much, much higher up. You know, kind of, it went up kind of at a diagonal on the west side of the village, and then it would edge off to the west. And up there at that point, I think that the old timers had installed pipes to carry it down to the village. Okay, this, I wanted to show you this because this is, I didn't tell you about this. This was the top of the village where they called the big house where the young communards lived. They called it the top. And they lived in the same complex as the shepherds. So they got to know the shepherds better than we did. But this is a very handsome young man who all the girls were crazy about because he looks like an Indian. And this is his girlfriend, Diane. And we were so hopeful that they would want to stay all year long, but they couldn't. This is Grand Pierre, and this is Petit Pierre with his girlfriend. And, you know, they were always leaving. They were coming and going all the time. And so it was such a loosely formed community, very, very loose. And you really had to kind of make it on your own because sometimes you couldn't trust some of the young folks to return the tools. One time we waited months to get a saddle back. But they were good people. Okay, this is Tarzan. He was always bare-chested. And he came, I can't remember, he came from Marseille, I think. But he was always, you know, very natural and with shirt off. Well, I had created what they called a buvette in front of the house. And it's like a little snack bar. So I made sandwiches with our cheese, and I made, you know, put out preserves, or I put out good butter, or whatever I had that was the sauce for that. And then I had bought syrups in a store in Gap. So I could serve people and make a little money that way, since I wasn't weaving. And so I did this for weeks. And then all of a sudden, here we're out on the trail that goes through the village, and we were there near the house. We could see people coming down and running down, and Tarzan was at the lead, and they looked really angry. And he got down to us and he said, "You're running a buvette, you capitalist." And we said, "Well, you can run one too, you know, you're free to do that." And so we tried to reason with him, and he said, "Well, Charlie wanted to do that further up." And I said, "Well, he can still do that. Tell him that he can still do that." But it was so funny because, you know, he had about 4 or 5 guys with him that were visitors, and they didn't know what was going on. But he was just really, really hot about that. But he kind of cooled down, and I said, "Well, come on over and I'll make you a sandwich, give you a syrup." And the syrups were fruit flavored, and you just put water with them, and they were kind of like refreshing drinks in the summertime. So that's all I can say about Tarzan. Okay, this is a history of Dormeuse. it's, as it says in the beginning, there were successive refugees of all kinds. In the 6th century, they were from the Piedmont. The Piedmont over there means the countries that border with Italy, Switzerland and France, and that area, the border area. And then the 14th century were disciples of a Vaudois, and then it says, and other rebels from the dominant Roman Catholic religion. And then after that, the population started to decline because people went to the colonies, they went to World War I, they went to industrial jobs, World War II, and then in 1955, there was only one person who lived in the village. That was sad, I'm sure. 1960 to 70, you got the prophets or barbus, beards. And they were people who wanted to study the Old Testament. And that worked fine until the guy who was leading the group got too friendly with other men's wives. So they were also trying to raise Moran's horses. And they did quite well. It was like a second birthplace from the Pyrenees for them. But they finally left because of the complications. 1970, 1980, the neo-rural, or the new farmers, or hippies, they called us hippies, you know, Brits, Germans, Americans, even a Zulu and a Japanese. And we had people from Holland. I'm sure we had people from very different parts of France too. Okay, at one time 4,000 sheep changed pasture, called transhumance. That was from a book that Paul wrote in 1991 called Droll Histories. I don't know if any communards live there now, but I bet that sheep are still coming up in spring. And I think that's the end of that. Oh no, I have something else. I want to finish this with, this is probably Moo-Moo's calf. And this is our balcony. And there were steps over here. So it got up those stone steps, very, very thick stones. And it kind of couldn't get down. So you've heard about the fiddler on the roof. We had a calf on the balcony. Anyway. And then, this is Eliab's humor. This was he probably did this at Christmas. He made this cock head out of probably cardboard and painted it. And I think that it was probably for Christmas. And so that's just what I wanted to show you at the end, that there was something very positive there. Here's looking at you, kid, is what that rooster is saying. Thank you for coming. Any questions?
Do you still keep in touch with Paul?
I do not. I did for a while. He married a woman from a town near Switzerland. And they decided they would go to Vietnam, and they taught English there. And they divorced, and he then married a Vietnamese girl. And that's all I know. I don't even know if he's alive. We're contemporaries. And we did keep up with each other for a while. But he was amazing. He could do a lot of different things. And I wouldn't have been able to live there if I hadn't been with him. But I certainly did develop some strength. I don't have the same thing now, but the milking was the big deal, you know. Getting your hands strong enough to do that, that's really something. Anyway, anybody else?
What years were these?
1975 to 78. Yeah, it was a little over 3 years. So that was enough winter time for me. And I didn't mention this, but there was one time I had to go home because my dad had had a stroke. And I was lucky because I had I had a newspaper in London that would commission me to do a story in the States. So I could pay for my trip home. And, but while I was there, I found out I had breast cancer. So, yes, I got well from that, I healed, but I did go back to normal use. And, but the problem is I wasn't really as healed as I thought, because I went to ski with a group who was, it was a tourist group. And, I was so shaky when we had to come back down, because it was a long descent. And I was just shaking. And a guy that was with us, he said, just step on the back of my skis and put your arms around my waist and I'm going to ski you down. What a relief. And so, it wasn't all roses, that was for sure. But, and I went home another time too, and was able to pay my way with an article I wrote. But it was a mixed bag in many ways, but I'm glad I did it, because I learned a whole lot about living simply. And we have a lot more to do to live simply. So, any more? Yes?
Well, how did you learn that your father had had a stroke? What kind of
We had a telephone. Did I not mention that? We had a telephone there. That was the only cord that went through the village. And, they called, and it was in the schoolhouse, and Eliab could pick it up, but it was like a phone from the 1950s. There wasn't a message minder or anything like that, but he happened to be there. And my parents left a message, so I got back to them. But, I didn't really explain that well about some of the other things that we didn't have. We didn't have water power, we didn't have solar power, we just had horsepower. and going down to the fair, for example, in the Deux Chevaux, that was coughing and spitting the whole time we were in it, and the front seat was not attached, so when you got in it was going like that. But it carried a lot of stuff. And so we were buying 50 kilo sacks of dry goods to put down in the root cellar. We had to have wheat berries, we had lentils, we had all kinds of stuff down there. Kerosene, we had kerosene lanterns for night. And my eyes were already getting to the point where I needed magnifiers. So it was hard for me to see sometimes at night. And we had torches. We always had to have batteries because we had radios and CD players and we had headlamps too. I didn't go into it because it was such a hard trip. We tried to go up to Mont Blanc one time, and that's the highest mountain in France. And so I was not a good enough skier to do that, but I almost fell into a crevasse on that trip. And it was the scariest thing that's ever, I thought I was gonna die. So, all those things put together, the problems with my family, they needed our help. I had to go home. I had to go home and help them. So, there you go. Any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you for coming.
No, I'm not.